Hey, so how's it, everybody? Welcome back to Freedom FANatics. My name is Alex, and today I'm joined by my esteemed colleague Sholan all the way from Cape Town. This is Freedom FANatics, brought to you by the Freedom Advocacy Network. Remember, guys, you can catch us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, as well as YouTube as well. All right, guys. So today, we for the past few weeks, and I think maybe because Sholan's been on away for the last couple of weeks, we've been delving into some good news stories. We've looked at some success stories across the country, but today we're going to drive home the reality for many young people, unfortunately, in South Africa when it comes to the state of education and what it means to go to school in many parts of the country. So these two stories are come out of the last 2 weeks, so they're pretty fresh. And the first one we're going to chat about comes out of Limpopo. It's about from an area an hour or so north of Giani, near Thohoyandou. And this is in the town of Malamulele. And there, a school was burnt, laptops and station as well as other infrastructure was destroyed by thieves who also left with feeding scheme food parcels. Now we've looked at some pretty horrendous stories on Freedom FANatics in terms of infrastructure destruction and the like. But Sholan, this one you're saying off air that it made you angry, and I think that's very fair.
Yes, no, definitely. Like this one is this story is extremely heartbreaking, especially because it reminds me of usually protests, social like service delivery protests. They tend to turn violent, and what ends up happening is people, start destroying infrastructure like in our own communities. And I think that's a very self-destructive behavior because it's self-defeating in the end of the day. Because I know we are always here trying to keep government accountable, but I also think it's important for us to also take up some personal responsibility. Because in the story, it's community members, and there might be in the minority, a few criminal bandits deciding, to actually destroy the facilities that actually meant to uplift the community, an educational facility of all things. And I believe that education, it's by far the most powerful weapon we have in this world, and therefore I think that it should be utilized because it's actually a poverty reliever. When people are educated, people are definitely under the right circumstances going to be able to uplift their financial and their living conditions. And when community members are destroying the facilities that future generations in this community is meant to use, it is self-destructive. And I mean, you're hitting yourself with the own back and asking yourself, why is the government doing this to me? And I mean, this government has a lot of failures. We don't need to be destroying ourselves even more than things are already difficult as they are. Yeah,
absolutely. I think one of the scariest things for me is how as South Africans, we have a culture of burning. Burning is a very vivid, it's a very destructive thing to do. But I think maybe there's an element here where, we look at things like unemployment. A lot of, I think, especially young men being unemployed, I think is particularly dangerous for society, where people feel undervalued, where they feel like they don't have any sort of stake in the game. And I suspect maybe that's at play here. And we don't know the sort of the backstory. Police are investigating. But, is this kind of thing, we live in a society where, 75% of young people are unemployed. Prospects are pretty grim. When you consider that, only 40% of kids who start grade 1 in the latest trends in the last 5-6 years at least aren't passing matric. So is this maybe just the more general sort of disillusionment with people's prospects and how people are reacting to kind of the state not really working for them?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Alex, because as you also mentioned that, this crime, because it's criminal activity, it's merely a symptom of the underlying problems in our society because people struggle to, be able to engage in the economic system in an honorable manner because things are so difficult. And it is quite a danger when we see in countries like Mozambique, in Nigeria, when you have these large populations of young men who are, unskilled, unemployed, and in impoverished circumstances. What tends to happen is that because they are like, we have nothing better to do. The government's not coming to save us. They've only made the economic circumstances worse. The education that we gain is not enough to actually, be productive in the workplace. That disillusionment, that frustration reflects itself in these violent actions. And I mean, in those countries, it's way worse because, like in Mozambique, you have the situation where there's like they tend towards terrorist groups. In South Africa, service delivery protests are, the name of the game, unfortunately, when it comes to, displaying the dissatisfaction with the state or anything in our society. And yes, I completely understand your point, and it speaks to a larger problem that, we do actually need a reformation when it comes to our education system, with the way things are being done, because clearly it's pushing so many people out of the system and leaving people stranded, in the wasteland, unfortunately.
Let's stick to the idea of service delivery protests and people, venting their frustration, their anger through service delivery protests, because we've dealt with some data that indicates that, because we speak a lot about getting people to vote, making sure people head to the ballot boxes, and the low turnout in elections is a bit of a reflection of the fact that people are politically motivated through protest. Now, interestingly, our next story, which comes out of the Eastern Cape, in a town called Mbali, comes as a result. The news broke because community members brought the town to a standstill over protests over a school not being rebuilt. So this is the school in question. The school is overcrowded. This is Pangindlela Junior Secondary, rather. And they've had a row since 2016 of wanting classrooms to be rebuilt. Now, the school has over 90 learners per class.
Sure.
And, in one class, they've got over 120 kids in one class. Now, that the maximum size for a class is 40. And so that's meant that these teachers have had to resort to, literally teaching under trees, which is, at our big age in 2022, is actually unbelievable. And one of the reasons that the parents and the staff reckon that the school wasn't rebuilt, you can see the roof caving in. Not to mention it being a complete safety hazard for children, completely an unconducive learning environment, was that the one school was supposedly meant to be renamed after Bantu Holomisa, the UDM leader. And so there's suspicion that the government is stunting that redevelopment because of political reasons. So I guess, Sholan, why should anyone trust the government? If you can, how do you resort to anything but protests? When you've got literally the roof of your school almost falling on your child's head, if they have a roof over their head at all when they're trying to learn.
Sure, no, for sure, Alex. I mean, and with these public schools, like these examples that you just showed us, it's been left behind by the ANC government a long time ago, because they are, more politically motivated in trying to actually educate South Africans. And I mean, in the article, it even speaks about how these circumstances has led to like a greater loss in matric pass results. And what it actually causes is that, many young people, many potential teachers even see stories like these, and the immediate response is that they don't want to leave this country. They want to use their skills to teach in overseas. You know, they are directed to more private institutions that are better functioning. You know, that actually have proper facilities in place, and people and teachers especially. I mean, because the overcrowdedness speaks to two things. It shows that firstly, there is a population that wants to be educated, so much so that there is too many kids for these people to facilitate, and in the overcrowdedness actually shows that there's a lack of teachers or professionals who are actually able to educate those children who want to be taught. And what we actually see is that this is not the only place where we have a shortage of you know educators or professionals to do this task. Because just I was just on Twitter before this, and I saw that our health minister even admitted to saying that in parliament that we have a shortage of doctors. We have a shortage of police officers as well. There's not enough security personnel in this country. And what happens is we actually have this brain drain of professionals who want to leave the country because the state has not, been taking care of our facilities and being able to keep our intellectuals, our professionals in the country. And I mean, that's the whole point of the education system is we need to train up young professionals so that they can in return benefit society, the very society that they come from. But when things are hostile for businesses, for so many companies, the immediate response is we need to go where things are much better. And I mean, when the state, like the ANC, doesn't want to really give attention to the school because of personal grievances they have with Bantu Olamisa and the UDM. I mean, like, bruh, there's bigger challenges this country is facing than, your issues you have with another politician. And I mean, we see that across the board, actually, when it comes to party politics. And it just causes people to be disillusioned. People don't want to engage in that. They're like, nah, you guys are too busy with infighting. And we are not being heard. And it literally causes this community to cause a complete shutdown of the town because they are demanding answers and demanding responses.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you touched on earlier a little bit about reformation and really revamping the school system in South Africa. And we've spoken a lot about school vouchers as an alternative to distribute the education budget a little bit more effectively. But the one thing that I came across when I was just reading up a little bit about school vouchers is the fact that one aspect that could help in creating better schools in the country is to celebrate the schools that do work.
Yes.
You have examples of schools in poor neighborhoods where schools work and schools function.
Exactly.
And I think maybe that's also a really important part of making people feel like the system works for them. And the reason I bring this up is because, as I mentioned, we advocate for people to make their voices heard at the ballot box. And I think the important thing is because we need the government to be held accountable. We need an accountable state. We need a capable state. And I think through voting, that's where people show their markers of appreciation or how well the government is doing for them. And because when the institutions fail, that's when you get this whole system of people not being educated, or even those who do get through the system go to university, and then a medical student gets to ComServe and they can't get placed, and so they have to look for other options. So, Sholan, for you, we talk about remedies, reformation. From what for you? If you had to step into Angie Motshekga's shoes for a day, and you could make a decision, what would be one thing that you would look to help alleviate children literally sitting under trees to learn?
Yeah, definitely. One thing I would do if I had to be the education minister, well, the basic education minister, definitely is the policy that we just spoke about, which is the school voucher policy that's actually proposed by the Institute of Race Relations. Because what that does is it automatically breaks down this overhyped and over reliance on this bureaucratic system that is really so structured and rigid that really does causes our education system not to flourish. Because what this school voucher policy would do is instead put money directly into the hands of community members, of parents, to actually fund the schools that they choose, the schools that they feel are worthy and deserving of their of the kids and of the funds that they have been provided with through this voucher. And then under resource schools like the schools we just spoke about, they will have to they will be given resources directly from the parents if the parents truly believe in their cause. The money won't just be willy-nilly be lost from the top when the treasury and the government say, okay, we've allocated this 400 billion to education. That money won't just be lost through this entire structure of bureaucrats, but it'll actually be given directly to our community members and to parents. And that would go such a long way. I mean, there's a lot of things that still need to be fixed, but that would go a long way to solving some of the problems we have. And another issue, Alex, and one we've also spoken about is especially the transformation of the curriculum that we have in South Africa. Because we are really outdated with regards to some of the subjects that we're still being taught and the options that we are given to choose from. I mean, some of the top countries in the world, whether it's South Korea or China or Japan, these people have already decided, what, we are going on a future looking education system that has a curriculum that focuses on things like coding and robotics and IT and computers and machinery. These are things that these people are focused on. And one of the subjects I really dislike, I don't know your opinion on it, but it's allo. I'm like, this thing is so useless. It has zero benefit for the future of this country, when we should be attempting to digitize the minds of our population that we have in this country. School children should be thinking about the future of the Internet of Things, about artificial intelligence. These are things that we also, like, I mean, our government is always talking big about, like, the fourth industrial revolution and so forth. But I'm like, guys, there are practical things that we need to get in place if we actually want a country that is ready for the future, an industrialized country that's ready for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the one thing I think is obviously the problem with such a stunted education system is that we just get left behind. Because if we look at, there's something called the TIMS report, which sort of assesses the extent of, or the aptitude rather, of students in maths and science. And South Africa, in the latest numbers that I saw in 2020, we were ranked, out of 48 countries, we were ranked 47th. So when children are like 10 in grade 4, they don't have that comprehension of maths that is required for something like coding. So, when I think, we hype up the idea of a crisis, an emergency, but the fact is, if we have this crisis in education, it really just does stunt it into the future. But I think the important thing to remember in terms of the school vouchers is that it introduces competition. So when you have a school that's not being rebuilt because of some political squabble, the parents themselves have the ability to say, you know what, I'm going to send to my child to a school, a private school, if they wanted to, a low fee paying private school, to get the education that they want for their kids. So I think, Sholan, let's leave it there. I think there's a lot of food for thought there. We could go on for hours talking about how to fix education in South Africa. But before we go, is any last thoughts before we jump into burning questions with Mbali?
Yeah, my last thought would definitely be that we've seen the issues and we've highlighted the struggles in this country, and specifically with regards to our education system. And burning down buildings and building down infrastructure is not enough. That's why we always encourage people, if you are going to complain, if you're going to be upset, if you're going to be frustrated, which you have a right to do, make sure that you do it in a productive way. And the most productive way in a democratic South Africa is through voting, and something that we all have the ability to do and the freedom and right to practice. So
Absolutely, guys. Couldn't have said it better myself. On that note, guys, remember to follow us at Badger of Liberty on your favorite social media platform, be it TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. And on that note, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Stay tuned for burning questions coming up now with Mbali.
Hello and welcome to another episode of #Burning Questions. Hi Alex, hi Sholan.
Hey Mbali.
I'm so used to saying hi Diego, so I almost said hi Diego as well.
Shame.
Diego bless you.
He's recovering from a week of traditional healing, so we wish him well.
Alrighty, guys, let's get right into the code card of the week, and this code card comes from Tony Leon, and the code card. Let me just make sure that it shows properly. There we go. And this code card reads: the rule of law is on life support. The state shuts out diverse opinions, and the ANC wants to reap up property rights. This is simple, straightforward. Alex, what do you think of this code card?
Yeah, I think he's definitely on the money. I think to dive into each of those aspects is an episode each in itself. And I remember Mbali, you actually spoke to Tony Leon last year.
Yes, yes, I did.
And he was very much advocating for people to get involved and to hold the government to account. But I think the aspect of the rule of law is something that is immensely important in a democracy, a foundation, and when that is undermined, things begin to crumble, and that is thinking more in terms of the institutions that are the gatekeepers. When you look at our courts, the National Prosecuting Authority, those kind of things. And those aren't necessarily within our control as voters, but to ensure that they remain uncaptured, I suppose. But I think it's definitely something to keep an eye on by just applying public pressure. So keeping on your toes. Because without that, I think everything else is at risk of crumbling.
Of crumbling, definitely. All right. Let us get to the first comment. It is quite lengthy, but let's get into it. So this comment comes from Gerard, and it reads: nonsense. We've never had such freedom of speech in our history as we have now. The rule of law has carried us thus far through the turbulent times. The land issue needs to be resolved, and Mr. Leon, you having studied indigenous law, know that the prescription of crimes does not apply to African law. We need to change our Eurocentric, westernized ideas of democracy to incorporate the ideas and thinking of Africans. The TRC and Constitution projects provided good cover for us privileged white people to escape retribution. With the greatest respect to your polished English, we need to reset that encompasses thinking of all and only the few that sat around the Codesa tables. Whew, that is a mouthful. Sholan, I'll give this one to you. Your thoughts?
Oh, that was a lot. I don't even know where to start. Shout out on that comment. But I definitely think that it's a very wrong thing to misread what I think Tony Leon was saying, because he's like saying things like this. All of this is nonsense. Where I feel like Tony Leon is essentially warning us of the risk and the dangers through which we are going. You know what? He's trying to say that the rule of law in this country is at risk. I think there's no doubt we can see that as clear as day. You don't need any westernized mind to tell you that the rule of law in this country is under threat. When a former president refuses to show up to court because he's such a big boss in Jacob Zuma, when nobody's being held accountable for things like state capture, when riots, engulf an entire a major province, which is KwaZulu-Natal in this country, and nobody's held responsible. We can clearly see that the rule of law is under threat, and especially with the part of the state, shutting out diverse opinions, which Mr. Gerard says, freedom of speech is not under attack in any form. The truth is the state really does, the ANC government more specifically, the regime that's in place, they really are not interested in listening to any diverse voices because they have, they have these socialist national democratic revolution goals, and they are not moving away from it, even though it's definitely hurting this country badly and in a very, very harsh position it's placing this country. And in those aspects, I definitely agree with him, with Tony Leon in this regard. Yeah. And I don't think we should just dismiss somebody as having Eurocentric, westernized ideas of democracy. Because I definitely think that Gerard speaking on things like white privilege, those are very socialist and left-wing ideas that he is speaking of. And you must not forget that those socialist and Marxist ideas of white privilege and westernized ideas, those also come from the West. They also come from the likes of Karl Marx, who's also a man who lived in Europe. So it's quite ironic that he's criticizing Western ideas, yet he's the same person who's propagating them in this very statement. It's quite
true. But before we get to Alex, don't you think maybe some part of his comment he's kind of right? And the part that I'm talking about, he says here, the rule of law has carried us thus far through very turbulent times. Don't you think maybe there's a bit of truth? I might be wrong,
no,
but
Yeah, no, that's exactly. I agree with that. That I'm not saying that the rule of law has not carried us through turbulent times, because it's the reason why South Africa is still functioning after so many years of ANC rule. But what I would caution against is that it is nonetheless under attack because it remains such a firm foundation on which our country stands. It's one of the pillars that keep this country functioning nonetheless. Justice system that is that proposes that the rule of law should be upheld, regardless of which person is president or which government is in control. Yes, it definitely has, and it will continue to carry us through turbulent times, which I foresee is yet to come. If the past years of democracy has not enough to be concerned about, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true. Alex, what are your thoughts?
I think just to emphasize the point about protecting the rule of law, and that's the thing. That's what we've really got to do. We've never had such freedom of speech in our history as we have now. That's totally true, and which is why it's something that we must protect against, and we must use it to continue to ensure that the rule of law is maintained. So there is some merit there in what Gerard's saying, absolutely. But as Sholan says, I don't think we must throw the baby out with the bathwater if you have some racialized ideas on whose ideas we should look at and whose we shouldn't. Just because of based on the amount of melatonin in the skin of the person who's making the statement.
All right, let's go to the second and the last comment for the day, and this comment comes from Sianda, and it's a simple statement. He says majority blacks don't own any property. Alex, who actually owns The land in SA.
Who owns the land?
Who does the land belong to? That's the follow-up question.
Oh, well, our comrades. So I think he's to a large degree he's right, and I think because a lot of people, the majority of Black South Africans who live either in rural areas, sort of in tribal lands, or in urban areas, don't have title deeds to their properties. So in that regard, Sianda's on the money. I think it's when you get into more like the historical claims to land and restitution, that I think that's a completely different sort of story to discuss. But I think one of the major issues is that a lot of Black South Africans don't have property rights. And I think a great way to ensure that they do would be through title deeds, giving people title to their land. They can use it to as leverage, and they can use it as an asset to grow their wealth even further. So I think if Sianda wants title deeds, I'm with him.
Yeah.
The follow-up question: who does the land belong to? This is a trick question.
Oh yeah. So
think about it carefully.
So the state mostly. Obviously, private land ownership is a complicated issue in South Africa, but mostly the state, and then to a large degree to tribal leaders as well, and then private individuals. And I think it's there is maybe an argument to be made for reforming. Our friend, a good friend, and someone you've worked with closely, Big Daddy Liberty. He speaks about potential movements in KZN under the Ingonyama Trust to maybe look at how the ownership of land happens in that system. But in that regard, there's also a lot of also in the country, there's a lot of state-owned land. A lot of people live on land owned by the government that the government I would hazard scared to sell or give to the people that live on it.
Yeah, that's true. And maybe Sholan, my question to you would be, what's the main reason why most Black people don't have property rights? What went wrong?
Yeah, so I definitely think we cannot ignore the fact that that during apartheid, during colonialism, it definitely disenfranchised a lot of Black people from their land. I mean, during apartheid, Black people were literally, and colored people and people of color were literally told, you need to get off from this land and you need to go to that side of the mountain. And that was a reality. It's undoubtedly the fact. But my question is, and another thing I would also have to add is that it's very difficult in South Africa to really, configure exactly who owns what amount of land and how many Black people own this amount and white people own this amount. That's a very hard task to do. I don't even think the apartheid government would have been able to do that. And I mean, they were the biggest segregationists out in the streets. You know what I mean? And something that I would also caution Sianda against is especially the proponents of people who make statements like these, especially like the EFF type or those radical folks in the ANC who are like, what, Black people need their land back. We need land reform, we need expropriation without compensation. The truth is, there's two things that is concerning with statements like these. It's firstly, we see through research done by the institutions like the IRR, who have done things like, is land reform really such a big issue for South Africans? And what we found is that it's actually not. The real issues that people concern themselves about is with regards to, do they have employment opportunities? Is job creation there? Do they have safety and security? And and can the kids have a proper education? Those are actually issues that people have and that people actually struggle with. And one of the things I'm a supporter, I'm like, give people as many title deeds into their hands, take those title deeds away from the state as much as possible. And we see work done by the Free Market Foundation. They do this excellently, where they give title deeds back into the hands of so many previously disadvantaged communities, and that's work that should be continued. Absolutely, I agree with that. But we should also be careful that who does the land go to in terms of what Sianda is speaking about? Because if you are proposing that land should be given back into the state, back to that the government should be the distributor of land. We have seen in places like Zimbabwe that when property is given into the hands of the state, it's reluctantly given back to the ordinary poor, struggling Black and colored and Indian people who were disenfranchised. But instead, in the case where we saw in Zimbabwe is Robert Mugabe, when he got those controls for land reform, he instead gave it out to his friends and his loyalists who were keeping him in power. So if I was Robert Mugabe, what Robert Mugabe would instead do is he was given a lot of land, and I would give it to Mbali, and I'd give Diego a few, but I wouldn't give it to Alex because Alex is this white privileged Westerner. But I would give it to the people that actually support me, and that is such a degradation of and it actually makes circumstances worse for Black people in general. I think. And it's also very wrong to assume that, that there aren't Black farmers in South Africa. That's a very wrong mentality to have, because we know that there are Black farmers, there are colored farmers. All farmers in South Africa is not just white.
That's true.
Exactly. Especially in areas like KwaZulu-Natal or the Eastern Cape and Limpopo. That's where you see a lot of Black landowners who do exist. And not everybody is white Afrikaners who own land in this country. Yeah.
Definitely. Alex, do you own land? Let's just clear that up.
Give me some land if you own land, Alex. Come on.
I wish I was so lucky.
Wow. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Burning Questions. Remember to catch us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. And do remember, your freedom is worth fighting for.
Yes, sir.